Welcome back to Open Line, Talking Politics. We have with us our political analyst, Pat Nolan. 1 week from tomorrow, people go to the polls. It's Election Day in Tennessee. There's some important state and county elections that are going on, primaries and congressional races, but also our state House and our state Senate. Some big stuff there. Jeremy Durham. That's gotten a lot of attention.
Well, that's right.
In Williamson County.
Of course, there was this report that came out from the Attorney General that was requested by the Speaker of the House that basically indicated that he had been involved in sexual harassment situations with 22 women up on the Hill. He had earlier been ostracized in terms of his office and access to the Hill by a preliminary report. This one came out. There were renewed efforts for him to resign. He has not done that. There is now pending, depending on how many legislators sign it, an effort to try to have a special session to basically oust him from office under the provisions of the state constitution. It takes a two-thirds vote, or two-thirds of the members in both houses signing a petition to have a special session. And then when they come, there has to be a two-thirds vote, at least in the House, to oust him. And we'll see if that happens. But in the meantime, he has suspended his campaign, but he is not off the ballot. He can still get votes, and there are some indications, even though he suspended his campaign, that there may be some behind-the-scenes efforts, dog whistles, to say he can go ahead and go out and vote for Jeremy if you want to.
Now, again,
he does have opponents on the ballot against him, and he has a Democrat. Whoever wins that has a Democrat running as well in November.
That's right. And this election is a primary.
It is a primary.
So his name is on the Republican primary ballot. There's another Republican running against him.
There's two other Republicans running. And the most likely person that seems to be most active in that race is Sam Whitson, but there's also a Stacey Givens who's also been running in that race. Now the Democrat is Holly McCall. She's unopposed, and remember, this is a primary, so when you go to the polls, you have to pick whether you want to vote in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary. If you vote in the Democratic primary, you won't see the Durham race if you vote on the Republican. And most people in Williamson County will be probably voting in the Republican primary. So his race, if you're in his district, and there's more than one representative in Williamson County, so you may go in the polls in Williamson County and not find it, but for your ballot, but there'll be a number of places that will have it. He's still on the ballot. If he gets more votes than anybody else, he will be the Republican nominee, and then if this special session's called, we'll see what happens April 15th, because that's when it's supposed to be scheduled to be called.
So after this horrible report comes out and all this pressure on him, he suspends his campaign, but his name is still on the ballot. So is the thinking that if he does get the most votes and is the Republican nominee, he would not suspend that campaign?
Well, I mean, he'll have to decide what he wants to do. I mean, I suspect going into the fall, he could stay in that suspension if he wants to. We'll see. I'm also not clear. We'll have to find out whether if he is ousted, if that's just an ouster for this particular rest of the legislative session. Now remember, this legislature is not going to meet again, but the new one comes in, the 110th General Assembly comes in January. If he's elected to it, he will be able to serve, I assume. And so then, and there's a provision in the Constitution saying you can't be ousted for the same reason twice. And by the way, the reason this came up originally, a lot of the Republicans said, well, we'll let the voters decide about this. But then they suddenly began to understand that he is eligible. If he gets reelected, he'd be eligible for a pension. And a lot of people don't want to have that extra case. The Tennessean has also been reporting that he is still eligible. Even if he is ousted, he'll still be eligible to continue, along with his family, to have the health care coverage that's provided to state legislators, provided he pays for the pension, the premium that's involved. So a lot of stuff going around there. There's also a subplot here where there's a Democratic legislator from the Knoxville area, Joe Armstrong, who's under federal indictment. He goes on trial next month too, and there's some who want to put him under this same call and consider whether kicking him out. Now, he's on trial in August. I'm not sure exactly when that will be over. So if they do meet August 15th, if they kick him out, he's still on the ballot too. He could be.
If they're going to meet, the thinking is they might as well just take care of two.
That was the feeling, although it's interesting. There are two different petitions. One of them is only about Durham, one of them has both. And both of them, one way or the other, both of them by this coming weekend has to get at least 66 signatures in the House, and I guess two-thirds in the Senate as well.
So is this an opportunity for Democrats? Williamson County is so conservative, but you do have a Democrat running here. What do you think?
Well, Holly McCall and the Democrats think that there's an opportunity here because of the problems that Jeremy Durham has had. They also think perhaps their chances are elevated because if Jeremy Durham is defeated, they'll be running against a Republican who's lesser known and doesn't have incumbency to help him out. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see. Let's first see what happens in August before we, and then for that matter, in the special session, to sort of see how you would analyze what's going to happen in November. We're, to some degree, particularly in this particular case with the ouster, we're going to be in a little bit of uncharted territory, at least in terms of having not been there before.
Let's go to David. Hello, David.
Howdy.
Hi. Go right ahead.
My question is about voter registration cards. Why does the counties and the state require your Social Security number on those cards when the counties and the state refuse to run that Social Security number through the FBI, NCIC database or the Homeland Security database? And why is conservatives considered to be on the right when they're on the left? Thank you.
Okay. I don't know.
I'm not sure I
Do you
understand
know-
the last part, but I would have to say call the state elections office and they will explain to you why they do that. I do know if you're going to vote, you have to bring both your voter ID card, which is basically where you're registered to vote in terms of where you're supposed to be voting, and has your address on it. And they also have to bring your driver's license. You have, I mean, there's a voter ID law in the state, which has been challenged, but so far upheld in the courts, that you have to produce both those to come in and be able to vote. Now, there are people who've objected to that, but so far it's been upheld in courts. And why they do the other things he was talking about, I'm not really sure. Nobody's ever. I'd have to go back and look at my card to see. I didn't know it had my Social Security number on it. But
The voter ID law, a version of it was overturned in Texas.
yes, but the one here in Tennessee has been challenged. But so far, the challenges here in this state have not been successful. So it's still on the books and still being enforced, and then still, I assume, creating some controversy about it. We haven't seen it as much this time because, again, we're in the primary. People are so distracted by the national stuff, and there's no statewide race to make that a bigger deal.
David, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, what did you mean by the other thing? When people on the right saying conservative, what do you mean by that?
Well, from what you've heard me talk before, and conservatives and conservative Christians say that they're on the right, and everyone says that they're on the right. Well, if you look at the Bible, from what it says in the Bible, that people like that are on the left with Satan.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, all right.
Well, I can't speak to the religious overtones of that, but
All right, I want to move on to the state House races.
Okay.
So we've done Jeremy Durham. Then we have, in our area, state Senate race with Dr.
Steve Dickerson.
Steve Dickerson,
Steve
right.
Dickerson is the first Republican to be a state senator in Davidson County, at least since Reconstruction, maybe ever. He was elected 4 years ago, seeking re-election. He is being challenged in the primary by another doctor, who I believe is a pharmacist named Ron McDowd. He's funding a lot of his campaign. He seems to be running a little bit more from the conservative side. He has attacked Dickerson in recent weeks with a mailer that had an ISIS flag on it, basically saying that Dickerson, because he had not supported efforts, well, there was a letter sent by some state senators, he was the only one who didn't sign it, that went to the governor saying we need to keep the federal government from bringing any more Syrian refugees here. He didn't sign that. He's been using that as a way of going after Dickerson.
That was quite a mailer.
He
says, do you want ISIS? He supports ISIS moving in next door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what the mailer said. He's definitely coming from the conservative side. It'll be interesting to see how that works in that district. I mean, this is in Davidson County, and this Davidson County tends to have a blue hue to it. Obviously, it's a district where a Republican can be elected. Dickerson's voting record in the state legislature, if you had a blind test on it, you didn't know the name or the party affiliation. If you looked at some of the things that Dickerson has supported in the legislature, you might think he might be a little bit more Democrat. He's running a TV ad right now because he plays a pretty mean guitar, and apparently he's in a band, and he talks about you don't have to have a license to play rock and roll, but in Tennessee you have to have a license and get approval from the state to do a whole lot of different professions, and including being to shampoo hair. And so he's sort of running on that particular conservative issue to try to get reelected. He also has, whoever wins that primary will face Aaron Coleman in that race as a Democrat, trying to take back the seat. Aaron Coleman is former military. She also ran a very close race and almost made it into the Metro Council as an at-large member last year.
Okay, and so that'll be a real challenge.
Yeah, she's unopposed. That'll be a race that'll be on the ballot
in November. And obviously the makeup here in the Senate, it's super majority for the Republican Party. when you look at, we're talking about the primaries right now, are there challenges primarily on the right, or are there just not many challenges when you look on the Republican side?
Well,
there in the
there
Senate?
are some, across the state, there are some challenges. I mean, Steve Dickerson's being challenged. Mark Green, who has also been talked about occasionally as a gubernatorial candidate, he's a doctor from up in the Clarksville area. He's on the ballot again in District 22. Jim Tracy, who we talked about before, he's running for re-election. He's being challenged over, to some degree, the gas tax issue. Tracy has talked about it because there has been some talk about whether they want to do it or not, and Tracy has not been violently opposed to it. Steve Lane has been running to say we don't need to do that, and so Tracy's up for re-election again. He's being challenged. Janice Bowling she's a former aide to Van Hillary some years ago when he was a congressman. She's a state senator up for re-election. She's being challenged by a guy named Michael Shane Wiltshire. There's also Dolores Gresham over in West Tennessee, also being challenged in her primary by Bob Schutt, who is the mayor of Savannah, Tennessee. That's getting kind of out of our viewing area, but that's another one to watch. And one other race that everybody's going to be watching, because there are a number of people running it, whoever wins this primary will be the new state senator, is up in Upper East Tennessee, where Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey is retiring and not seeking re-election. So there are 4 Republicans seeking that up there, and I believe John Lugbird is who I think is involved in some of the communication radio business up there. Has raised the most money and therefore seems to be the most likely person to win. Again, whoever wins that primary, there's no Democratic opposition, but that gives you a little bit of an idea. Not a lot, but again, we don't have that many. We only have half the Senate up this year.
Right. And then back on more locally and in the state Senate, or the state representative race, you have the Speaker of the House, Beth Harwell. There, on the Democratic side, there are 2 people running against her.
Yeah, we talked earlier about some of the women that are running. There was a concentrated effort to get some women to run for various legislative seats this year, primarily on the Insure Tennessee issue, and Sydney Rogers is one of those in that particular case. She's running against the Speaker in November if she gets past the primary. She's running against a man named Chris Moth, who ran against Beth Harwell before and lost. He has funded quite a bit of his own campaign. I think put $50,000 in it just recently. That's a lot of money in a state legislative race. So we'll see what that has. Most people think Rogers would be the favorite, but you have to watch that particular one. Beth Harwell has no opposition in August, but she will face one of these 2 Democrats.
What do you think the issue there is? Is it Insure Tennessee? Is that kind of the driving issue? Frustration that the legislature in particular?
I'm sure in general, both of them will probably run about the fact that the Republicans have had a supermajority, yet they're not dealing with a lot of the issues that they think are most important for Tennesseans. And Insure Tennessee will be one of those. Of course, she will come back to say, well, look, I've appointed this special committee. They've come up with something of an alternative to Insure Tennessee that over time might give coverage to all the uninsured in the state. It's not clear whether they'll do both Phase 1 and Phase 2. So I think she'll try to use that That's a Republican district. I mean, the Republicans drew all these lines, whether it's in the Senate or the House. And trust me, you can be sure that the Madam Speaker drew her district to be as favorable as she could make it. And so I think whichever one takes her on in November will have their hands full.
It's been a tough battle. All right, now let's talk about something that's been in the news a lot, these school board races.
Yeah, we got half the school board, actually
so
over half the school board. There's 9 members on the school board, 5 of them are up for re-election.
So big picture here.
Seats are.
Big picture, the issue once again is coming down to charter schools. Would you say that's right, or privatization?
It seems to be. This is sort of a late developing race, as you see in a lot of these, because they're not these even though there are 9 districts in Davidson County, they're usually not big enough for them to be on television about it in terms of buying ads. So most of the campaigning goes either door to door, or canvassing, or a lot in direct mail. So a lot of these direct mail pieces are coming out. Some of them are coming from groups that are not the actual candidates themselves, and that has created some controversy. We had a couple of those this week. One that was sent out in one of the races where there is no incumbent, but the MNEA is supporting this particular candidate and said, well, you need to vote for her for re-election. Well, she can't be re-elected. She's not on the school board. So they've apologized about that. They said that was a mistake. They didn't check the copy. There's also probably a little bit more contentious situation where Martha O'Brien, a very respected nonprofit over in the lower East Nashville area, has one of their top executives sent out an email basically saying, here's some people who are running for the school board. They'd be very supportive of of charter schools. You ought to support them, and there's a job opportunity here. If you want to be a volunteer for them, you get paid $10 an hour. Well, some of the opponents on the school board who are not charter supporters at all feel like this has been aimed partly at them. This was only aimed at one of the candidates, but they feel about it too. Will Pinkston, who has been quite an outspoken opponent of charters, has now filed a complaint about this with both the state attorney general and with the IRS, saying this is a violation of both state and federal law. We'll see what happens. Martha O'Brien people say they've been assured by their attorneys they've not done that, and that they would do this for any candidate if they were offering a job opportunity.
And you can decide for yourself. Go look at the emails. She seems to be really pushing people to go out and get involved, and you can decide what you think there. Martha O'Brien Center actually runs.
They do have a couple of current charter schools, and they were just turned down to have another one. So I mean, they have been involved in charter schools, whether they were involved in this email situation or not. So that tends to make this even more contentious. And again, we've got about 3 different races where charter schools could play a role to some degree. There's out in District 9, out in the west part of town, with Amy Froege, the incumbent, seeking a second term against Tom Druffel, who's the manager at the Holiday Inn Vanderbilt. Amy Froege is an attorney. Again, I mentioned Will Pinkston. He's a former aide to Governor Bredesen. He also was a former reporter at the Tennessean. He's been kind of quiet in recent months, but he's been pretty combative on some of the issues involving charter schools. Also kind of got to be a critic of the former schools director, Dr. Desi Register. He's been opposed by a guy named Jackson Miller, who's a businessman. He also says one of his qualifications would be that when he was a student, he was one of those kids that kind of fell through the cracks, so he understands how that happens and what needs to be done to intervene for those kind of folks. There's been some charges back and forth about his record and divorces and some other things.
It's interesting the Chamber of Commerce didn't endorse either one.
No, they stayed out of that particular race.
They stayed out of that race, yeah.
Even though I think at one time they were the Tennessean endorsed Pinkston too, which they did not endorse Froege, which made some people mad. But they felt Froege, particularly because where they were about to hire the new schools director, Froege put out a motion that said, well, let's wait for a little bit while before we do something, and that didn't sit well down there, didn't sit well with others. So again, that's 2 of the very contentious seats. One of the ones that's up also is Sharon Gentry, who's up in District 1. She is the chairman of the board. She's being opposed up there, but that's been sort of a quiet race. At this point, it would appear that she might be in a pretty good position to come back. District 3 is also up. That is Jill Spearing, who's the incumbent in that seat. She's there is a consultant, a special event consultant in that race named Jane Grimes Manili, who is a special events consultant at Martha O'Brien Center in District 3. And there was a former candidate there, Norman Merrifield, who was an author, and he did some professional presentations, but he's withdrawn. So I'm not sure whether he's still on the ballot or not, but it'd be down to those 2. And then there's one open seat, and that's in District 5, where Elise Kim is not seeking re-election. There's Christina Buggs, who's the youngest candidate, 30 in the race. She's taught in both metro and charter schools, Smithson Craighead. She's the one that had the MEA goof in her race, endorsing her and saying you need to re-elect her. Also, Miranda Christie is an attorney in that race. Corey Gathery is a pharmacist in that, and Erica Lanier, who's a parent. So a lot of people running in some of those races. Again, unlike the Metro Council race, it's up. This is whoever gets the most votes with. There's no runoff provision in these races the way there is in the mayor or the vice mayor.
These are very important. These are big issues. They're very contentious issues. A very, very important race. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. Maybe we'll show some of the mailings that are going out, because we're going to see a lot of mailings if you're in this area. Take a break. Be back right after this.